I may not be right, but I'm absolutely convinced that the single greatest determinant pertaining to whether or not realtors secure marketable property listings relates to how the pricing process is professionally traversed by them. We can appreciate this by reviewing how many home sellers respond after a so-called listing presentation or marketing proposal. That being, "Hey John, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. We are very impressed. It's just that we're going to need some time to review and think about what you presented tonight." Now, for our Real Estate Town Advocate members and the invited guests who will have access to our first 3 sessions, let me ask this question, which of course, given this format, must be a rhetorical one. What do you think is the major reason for the aforementioned home seller indecisiveness or decision delay? A. Could it be that they need a few more days to peruse your glossy brochures, or more time to muse over the merits of an open house? Or B. Is it because they want to run a background check on you or follow up on your testimonials? I doubt it. Or could it be C. that they're actually taken aback and surprised to learn that homes are now marketed on the internet, or they want to figure out how MLS or IDX works? Again, I very much doubt that as well. These reasons to me are highly unlikely. Let me give you what I believe is the reason why millions of homeowners over the past decades have indicated that they need more time, even when they were planning on listing that very night. That is, before they met and heard from the prospective realtor and how the subject of pricing was handled. It's because, in my view, that they now require time to get over the trauma that has been visited upon them pertaining to how the subject of price was introduced, that they now harbor deep resentment for the realtor who seems to be all too willing and in some cases even eager to volunteer for the role of being the bearer of bad news. Accordingly and understandably, many home sellers suddenly experience a profound need to console one another and regroup after listening to a tactless, insensitive, and amateurish data-driven pricing presentation, or perhaps the induced trauma that home sellers are ritualistically introduced to had to do with being offended by the callous, insensitive, following industry cliches, such as the words comps. Let me spell it. C-O-M-P-S, as in, here are some homes that are comparable to yours. Let's take a look at my comps, and then after I get through offending you by defining your cherished home in your presence, no less, as an interchangeable widget, a commodity, or a stock, just in case there is still any chance that you are still breathing, why don't I guarantee that you completely loathe me by suggesting, after we review some comparable homes to yours, that I then attack you with something else, and that is that I have brought information on comparable children to yours. Even worse, some homeowners will actually be told, let's take a look at these comps or similar homes to yours, and there actually are some properties included that the assaulting real estate professional hadn't even visited. Little wonder, after such devastation, why millions of home sellers who had planned on getting started that evening are now compelled to sheepishly say after the presentation, we'll get back to you. Can we get back to you? We want to think this over, but we'll get back to you. Let me now share a tip as to the very moment one loses the opportunity to ever represent these home sellers, unless, of course, they're your family, close friends, or a deep referral, and that is when home sellers, in their desperate attempt to preserve the individual dignity of their home, their lifestyle, or their standing in the community, or their very family, are forced to say, in response to the cruelty surrounding words like comps and similar homes, the following: but that home doesn't have 5 bedrooms. Or, hey, wait a minute, that property doesn't have a swimming pool. Or, gee, but we just put in a new kitchen. What the home sellers are really conveying is this: because of your amateurish insensitivity, you just lost the listing or any chance to be selected by us because you callously, clumsily, and incorrectly characterized our precious home as a commodity. And unlike a commodity where wheat, barley, copper, and gold, etc., are all viewed as indistinguishable from one another, and where pricing is collectivized, we believe that our home should not be treated in such an incorrect, lazy, and stupid fashion. Or B, you just insulted our 20 years of efforts in making our home special and different by throwing around data in a very impersonal and pompous fashion. Or C, how can we ever have you represent us or ever trust your suggestions or research regarding price when you have not demonstrated the ability to even grasp or recognize what's distinctive about our home? Never mind, why would we even think that you can represent us at all? Are you going to be showing these buyers these 5 same properties and commenting, let's take a look at these similar homes? Now let me introduce a more strategic method of preparing for this all-important vignette, if you will, by sharing with you what I have suggested to realtors across North America for many years and from personal experience. Folks, while every home is distinct and truly like no other, as is the case with your lifestyle, let's take a look at other properties that buyers are likely to have exposure to at the same time they're evaluating your property. This information will give us a strong sense regarding buyer behavior in today's marketplace. Now, to the real estate town advocates listening, as I just illustrated, this change means that homeowners no longer need to be offended by futile efforts to compare homes because the focus shifts away from the relative merits of homes and over to present-day buyer behavior. The other surefire way to lose listings regarding how pricing is mishandled is when individuals merely mimic the following industry-wide and supported dubious methodology. I wish I could say that I believe in this approach, but if I did, then we'd both be wrong. Here goes. Well, folks, regarding pricing, here's what I did. I went to my computer and I did some market research, and here's what I came up with. As you can see here from this printout, the first column on the far left represents homes in the market now. These are the properties, if you will, that are your competition. The next column are homes that haven't sold as yet. This next column here are homes that didn't sell and were actually taken off the market. The next column to the right shows the list to sales price, because oftentimes there is confusion over what price a property was listed at and where it ended up selling for. This next column shows some absorption rate information, and the next one here indicates days on the market information. And I've also included some contextual macro and micro economic trends. Now let me go back to our real estate town advocates so I can properly review this horrific, unprofessional, ineffective, yet relentlessly mimicked industry approach. By first, though, acknowledging and paying respect to the challenge that every realtor in North America faces. Specifically, realtors need to present facts and data, yet in a way that causes home sellers to trust their motivation. Consequently, let me ask, might there be a better way to still provide the same accurate data while causing home sellers to all want to select you because of how you professionally and sensitively and respectfully handle the subject, and will you also never take a listing at either a penny higher or lower than you would have had before my sharing the following strategic process with you? The answer is a resounding yes. But in order for us to achieve this elevated level of consultative pricing effectiveness while never violating our inner beliefs or ethics, will require that we emulate the thinking made known through the Age of Enlightenment. You see, during that period, society was encouraged to challenge all embedded beliefs to determine if they were really, truly valid. And just as I have suggested that our entire industry needs to evolve by changing the expression listing agent to marketing realtor, so too we must be willing to challenge how we have handled pricing so that it comports with the following strategic thinking. And critical thinking, incidentally, that also stresses the importance of timing, tone, and trust. Now let's review these strategic questions. Question number 1, I'm asking you now. These are rhetorical, but I want you to reflect upon them. What percentage of realtors, in your view, overprice their own personal residence? Again, what percentage of realtors, in your view, when they put their own personal residence on the market, do you think become more subjective and less riveted by the objective data? Now, that's a question that I've been asking for many years, and quite frankly, the lowest percentage I've yet to hear is 90%. A statistic, incidentally, that is indirectly supported in the best-selling book, Freakonomics. Question number 2, what percentage of these realtors have access to all of the data? When I ask that question, the typical response is, hey, 100%. What these two strategic questions suggest is that virtually all realtors have access to all the market data, and yet virtually they all overprice their own personal home. Then perhaps our celebrated use of data, and in some cases robotic use of data, when introduced prematurely to home sellers, enjoys very little, if any, value, and perhaps instead creates irreversible damage to a potential professional relationship between you and the home seller. Now let's move on to question number 3. The third question that no realtor should go to a home without mulling over is this. What percentage of home sellers before you arrive, already possess a strong sense of a price that they would like to start out with? Let me ask that again. What percentage of home sellers, in your view, given the internet, given access to property data themselves, what percentage of home sellers do you believe before you arrive already have a strong sense or even a commitment to a starting price? Now, when I've asked that question, almost every realtor has told me basically everybody. Now let's stop right here so I can summarize the information so far. Number 1, it is critical that realtors always tell the truth and show all relevant data to home sellers. Obviously, you will never mislead or deceive a homeowner in order to secure a listing or advise any home seller in a way that is inaccurate or harmful, because that would violate your code of ethics. And the classic definition of agency is where you and the clients are as one. That said, how should one incorporate the answers to my strategic questions as they relate to pricing consultation and how to best advise home sellers that you're hoping to represent on this subject? Number 1, I suggest you elevate your role from a mere data monger appraisal role to that of a realtor who is operating also on the knowledge and wisdom level regarding how transactions and negotiations come together. For that, I'd like to refer to the pyramid here that I designed for my book, Leveraging Your Links. As you can see here in the pyramid, I basically referenced the noted journalist Eric Sevareid, who suggested that in the information age, the lowest value professionals have is at the bottom, at the data level. They have a little bit more value at the information level, and then their value begins to ascend as they get to knowledge and then to wisdom. Now, let's see how a pricing consultation that is driven by your knowledge and wisdom first, and then by the use of data and information secondarily, as opposed to data first, and then your knowledge and wisdom, will absolutely revolutionize your tone, your timing, your trust, and thus your effectiveness, all without changing any recommendations that you make or on any data that you use, where it doesn't even impact a home in terms of a penny, in terms of where you would normally list the property. The only thing that changes is that it will only be you moving forward who decides whether you'll take the listing, and never again will you have home sellers eliminate you because they're uncomfortable with how this extremely incendiary and sensitive subject was managed and introduced by you. The first step in a knowledge and wisdom-based pricing process is where you reverse the order that the industry has suggested regarding your listing or marketing presentations. Virtually all industry textbooks for decades have suggested that we begin listing presentations by first broaching the subject of marketing with price to follow. I believe this is very, very counterproductive because many home sellers are much more anxious about price, and because they are anxious about price, when many realtors begin by saying, well, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my company and a little bit about myself and what we do to market homes, or if somebody begins by saying, how are you going to select an agent? They don't even say realtor. How are you going to select an agent? Are you going to pick somebody that will just tell you whatever it takes, or somebody that will tell you the truth, which hideous beginnings? When people begin by starting about themselves or their company, it compels many homeowners to have to interrupt you. And when a homeowner is forced to interrupt you, they subconsciously resent you for causing them to manifest rudeness within their own home. And therefore, it becomes very difficult for them to want to do business with you. Moreover, oftentimes if a home seller says, geez, can we just get to the price, or you don't have to sell me in yourself? Even worse is when a realtor says, oh, we'll get to that. Oh, bear with me. I'll be covering that, because that's very, very frustrating for home sellers. So therefore, I respectfully suggest that you forego that practice for the rest of your career, and instead you begin every marketing proposal, every relationship building conversation with home sellers by starting this way. Folks, this evening, I'd like to review with you some marketing strategies as well as some pricing strategies. We can begin either with the marketing and then move on to the pricing, or if you prefer, we can begin with the pricing and then move on to the marketing. Now, by beginning by giving people a choice, keeping in mind that many, if not most, home sellers are going to say, well, why don't we begin with the price? That means that you are in accordance with the wishes of what people have in terms of this process, and they respect that. Now that we've eliminated the mistake of beginning based on what we want the agenda to be without giving people a choice, and instead we're going to say we can begin with price and then go to marketing, or marketing and then go to price, let's take it from when people say, well, why don't we begin with price? When you begin with price, here's what I suggest that you say to all home sellers as a process. Folks, we've made a science out of pricing in today's marketplace, and we provide our clients with 3 distinct pricing options. Pricing, or strategies, if you will. Pricing strategy number 1 that a lot of home sellers select is where they want to pick a price that's in accordance with a CMA or an appraisal, and we can talk about that process. And the reason they want to do that is because they believe that there's a greater likelihood, as do I, that the home will appraise, number 1. Number 2, they want to do that because a lot of the buyers have a sense of value and a lot of the realtors have a sense of value. So that would be pricing strategy number 1, folks. Why don't you write that down? Option number 1, we priced according to the recommendations in terms of the data. Right? Now, for the Real Estate Town Advocates listening, I want to point out something that I did that I don't think we've ever done in the industry. According to all the textbooks and what I've been exposed to, I didn't say you should price it at the CMA or the appraisal because buyers know value. Because let me ask you this question. Do you think all buyers know value? No, then why would I say that? Because I'm suggesting to the home seller I'm stacking the deck and I'm exaggerating things to benefit me, and people aren't stupid and they deserve complete honesty. I also didn't say realtors know value. Do all realtors know value? Well, I want you to think of the last time you invited in 50 or 60 of your colleagues to price one of your properties and you asked everybody to write privately where they think the price should be. Were they all the same, or was there a dramatic differential? Without question, there was a dramatic differential. So why would I ever say to a prospective client something that isn't accurate? So I'm not going to say like everybody else because realtors know value, because buyers know value. No, because some realtors know value and some buyers know value, because I believe prospective clients will sense that I am not stacking the deck and I'm not trying to build the case for any one of their options. Folks, pricing strategy number 2 that some home sellers opt for is referred to by many as the less is more pricing strategy. Some home sellers believe that if they have a price that's below what the data suggests, that it might even create a bidding war. It will get the property sold faster. And so some people, they've already made a commitment to another property. They want to get out of the home. They're basically overwhelmed by the carrying cost, and they're not looking to stretch for every penny they can possibly get from the sale of the home. So folks, that's strategy number 2. We actually put the property on the market a little below the recommended pricing in terms of the data, as imperfect as the data is. Pricing strategy number 3, I refer to as a retail pricing strategy. And the reason I call it a retail pricing strategy is because for well over a century, many retailers will actually price into their products, their lifestyles or whatever, or all their goods and services rather, they'll put it a little bit higher than what they need to get or what they want to get, because they believe that some consumers like to negotiate. And because they actually believe that some homeowners or some buyers want to negotiate, and there are some people that don't want to pay full price, some home sellers want to replicate that, and they want to start out by putting a price a little bit higher than the recommended price in anticipation that some buyers may offer less. Now, of these 3 pricing strategies, philosophically, which of the 3 do you think makes the most sense to you folks? Now, let's review what we have just done in terms of a process. Now, clearly, at this point in time, many home sellers are going to say, well, we can't even pick a strategy until we get a sense of what are we talking about here, Alan? What does the data show? Now, at this point in time, now I'm going to introduce the data exactly the way that some of you would have started off with. Because some of you wouldn't even go through this process. You wouldn't have asked people what they want to begin with. You wouldn't have told them that there's an array of approaches. You don't give them the sense that you're looking at it from their prism of what might be best for them. No, instead you are going there as a data monger, just basically showing and vouching for imperfect data, as if you're the appraiser as opposed to a marketing strategist that is there to help them concoct the most effective pricing strategy. We must make a distinction between, again, the role of an appraiser versus the role of a marketing strategist who is going to be retained by the home sellers. There's a world of difference. And that's why so many homeowners, I believe, hate us, because we don't show that respect and sensitivity. And then we even compound that by stacking the deck, by actually showing them illustrations. Well, as you can see here from this graph, in the first 2 weeks, that's when the property is going to get the most exposure. So please don't price your home too high here. Let's bring it down. Or you've got to be careful not to overprice your home, because you might be making other properties more appealing. Or I have a pricing video that I got at a convention because the subject of pricing is out of my purview and too sophisticated for me. And by the way, do you think the pricing video is going to be information that shows the pitfalls of underpricing or overpricing? No, the homeowner will actually think that you already anticipated that they want too much, and you have come very prepared to negotiate against them to get them to bring it down. And you have all of the graphs, all of the pyramids, all of the illustrations. And in the same way that we stack the deck when somebody says to a home seller, when there's an offer that comes in, well, folks, oftentimes the first offer is the best offer. Now, that's a hideous thing to do, and I'll tell you why. Unless you are just as likely to say just as often to home sellers when an offer comes in, remember, folks, oftentimes the first offer is the worst offer. No, I actually believe as an industry, we have been more predisposed to say to our home seller clients, oftentimes the first offer is the best offer, then we would to say to them, oftentimes the first offer is the worst offer. And both can be true because we're not quantifying it. We're not saying 22%, 75%, but these little thoughts are suggesting to home sellers that we are more concerned with their home selling so we make a commission than we are helping them fight for every possible penny they might be able to realistically achieve. Now, I use the word realistically. Here's other language I want to pass on to you. I recommend that you say to home sellers, folks, I don't want to help you select the highest possible price. I want to help you select the highest realistic price. You see, home sellers want the highest possible. You want the realistic. That's a comforting synthesis, the highest realistic price. So after you go through the 3 pricing strategies, some people want to price their home based on the appraisal. Some people want to price their home lower. Some people want to put it a little higher because they think buyers might actually try to negotiate. After you've done these 3, they're then going to say to you, but now they trust you, time and tone here, they're going to say, well, Alan, what do you think? At that point in time, I'm going to say, well, folks, I think we've got to make sure that we don't put your property on the market at the highest possible price. I think we put it on at the highest realistic price. But let's discuss it and let's go over buyer behavior in today's marketplace. Now, the next point I want to make is this. I don't believe that by your tenderizing the home seller, by starting in a consultative fashion, by reviewing with them the fact that realtors as well as home sellers have the right to explore all possibilities. See, there are some home sellers that they'll even rather have their home on the market for 6 months and then take it off for 2 years because they can't get a price that they want. Because the stand that you take depends on where you sit. But a realtor only gets compensated if the property sells. So how could not that self-interest not manifest itself in some of our language if we don't strategically think very carefully about how we represent ourselves? And that's why you have to be meticulous in how you express your spirit of intent. And that's why, again, when you're saying things like, oh, you've got to be careful about this, or the first 2 weeks, or oftentimes the first offer is the best offer, or we can try it at that price. You never want to say that. Oh, we can try being married, because there are many listings that you would take at a certain price, but they're not going to give them to you right now because you made the mistake of saying, well, I think that's very aggressive, but we can give it a shot. Who under the sun wants to have somebody represent them who thinks that way, who actually talks to people that way? So all this process does is it doesn't change the outcome of where you price a property even 1 penny, but it causes home sellers to trust where you're coming from, that you are not loaded for bear, if you will, to cause people to see all the reasons why they should come down in their expectations. Because I don't think there's anybody in the history of the industry who's ever come up with a method of reversing the human greed that's manifested in all of us. Again, what percentage of realtors overprice their own personal residence with all of the data? So what this means is that you have to be completely honest, completely accurate, make all the recommendations that you would normally make, but do it after first tenderizing the home seller, beginning the presentation by giving them choice, showing them that there's different approaches to this, then getting to the data, and then you're back to where you normally would be, but you arrive there with a lot of mutual respect and trust and sensitivity. And this is so critical to securing every listing and every marketable property, and that's the purpose of this. Now, a few other points. Don't ever tell people that real estate is like a commodity. First of all, it isn't. Commodities are gold, wheat, barley, stock. All pricing is the same. Everything is completely indistinguishable. You could have 2 homes built by the same builder on the same year on the same street, and they'll actually be different right now. How dare us think that all homes are the same, in much the same way that realtors don't like it when consumers think you're all the same. And so because of that, we have to make sure that we don't use language like commodities. We have to make sure that we don't say to home sellers, well, your property is like a stock. First of all, it isn't like a stock. So we can't lie to people and say, folks, your home is like a stock. If your stock was IBM and if it was going for $100, do you think you could sell your stock for $110? That's ridiculous, and I'll tell you why. Because the same realtor doesn't then say to a buyer on a $1 million property, well, if you were buying IBM stock and it was $100, do you think you could offer less? They would never say that to a buyer about a property. Then why would they use that false logic with a home seller? Because we're basically saying to the home seller, we want to confuse you and use words like commodities or stock to try to get you to come down in the price, even though we know we can't use that ridiculous logic with a buyer. We can't say to a buyer, oh, come on now, that property's $500,000. If you were buying stock, do you think you could offer less? We would never pull that nonsense. Let's not ever again have anybody pull that nonsense with a home seller. Not that anybody that I know is, but if you know of anybody doing that, we've got to stop that. Now, the last word I would say about pricing and pricing strategies goes like this. Thank God that home sellers are like realtors who also want to shoot for a higher price initially. And thank God that real estate is not a commodity or a stock. Why so, Alan? Here's why. Because call E-Trade and tell them that you've got $1 million worth of stock and ask them how much they'll sell it and market it for. And you probably hear $10 or $12. See, I don't think those of you listening would want to market a $1 million home for $12. I think you want more. And the reason that you will get more is because homes, since they're not commodities, aren't traded that way because of the data being perfect. Because if the data was perfect, if there was a commodity, buyers would just go online, they'd see the price, and they'd bid and they'd buy the property. No, and properties would take a day to sell. It's only because homes take weeks and months to sell, because home sellers are trying to get more and buyers are trying to pay less, which empowers buyer realtors and seller realtors and marketing realtors, is why you can make tens of thousands of dollars on $1 million or $2 million property, because it involves you taking weeks and months to nurture the delusion of consumers, of clients. If everything was that meticulous, that punctilious, that exacting, there's no way in the world you would be in this industry. There's no way that you would have a career, because you could never make money if real estate was a commodity. Because again, why don't you learn what commodity traders and stockbrokers make when somebody buys $1 million stock? So for anybody to capitulate to this anti-consumer perspective is very damaging, both for consumers and for us. Again, thank God that home sellers initially want to try for higher prices, because if they didn't, you would have absolutely no value. Now, the reason why I have devoted some time to pricing strategies is not just because I believe that home sellers should be engaged by us in the same way that doctors will give patients a choice in terms of surgery and not having surgery, or different treatments, or lawyers will sit down and talk to people. It's your choice whether you want to take the witness stand or not. It's not just that we elevate our career to the level of other professionals that actually engage consumers and clients and respect their view and incorporate them and have adult discussions with people and try to resolve strategies. It isn't just for that reason, as opposed to just going there as robots reciting data that's imperfect. That's not the only reason. The other reason I wanted to cover pricing for the Real Estate Town Advocates is, here's what's going to happen. You're going to have an increasing number of homeowners, home sellers, say to you, hey, Susan, come on, you're the Real Estate Town Advocate. You're doing a great job of promoting our town. If our town is that great, then our home should be worth even more now, right, Susan? That's what's going to happen, and you're going to need to be prepared to both be extremely accurate, completely honest, completely use data, but also make sure that home sellers understand that there's parameters here, there's choices here, and that you will work with them. And you can't be boxed in to data-driven presentations. Keeping in mind, how many times do you think you've heard in your real estate office the day begin with a fellow realtor announcing the following: I can't believe somebody paid that much for that. See, what that tells us is that the data is not perfect. It's very subjective. And therefore, it requires knowledge and wisdom buttressed by data. Speaking of how fortunate we are that real estate pricing is the complete opposite of commodities or stocks, where there is absolutely no negotiating involved, because if that was the case, realtor fees would come under greater scrutiny. I am reminded of a conversation I recently had with the iconic and incomparable one and only Jim Weichert, who said to me, and I quote, "Alan, we should all be thankful that real estate transactions have become so numbingly complex, because if they were not, consumers who are empowered by the web would not need realtors as desperately as they do." So think about this. The next time you are lamenting that either home sellers are irrational about the price or transactions have become too complex altogether, thank God. Let's say it again. Thank God, because if this was not the case, you would not be indispensable and you would not be as supremely necessary and valuable as you are.